Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Dr. Kim Whitler. Today's topic, a marketing potpourri, name, image, and likeness, activism, and the stages of CMO success. So Kim started her career at P&G and went on to be a general manager at Aurora Foods and CMO of David's Bridal. She then shifted to the academic world and is now a professor at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. She was also recently named to the American Marketing Association board. She has spent much of her time researching and studying the CMO job and brings a very unique perspective as both an operator and a student and researcher of the position. She is joining us for the fourth time, so she's in our Hall of Fame. Welcome, Kim.
Oh my God. I feel like the Alec Baldwin. And how many times has he been on SNL?
A lot.
Like 20 sometimes. No.
Look, if we can have the run that SNL has for CMO Confidential, we'll take it.
Well, it's an honor to be back with you. I love it.
All right. Very good. Now, you have been super busy teaching and publishing since we last spoke. Let's start with one of the articles that you wrote called CMO Success, Stage by Stage. Give us the synopsis of this in a nutshell, and then we'll talk about what it means for CMOs and companies hiring CMOs.
Okay, well, if I can, let me step back and even talk a little bit about how we got to this research, because this is how projects work for me. This is what I love. What happened was there's a gentleman named Jonathan Metrick. He's the chief growth officer and partner of a tech VCPE company that has a number of different portfolio brands. And he came to me with this problem and he said, Kim, I know that you do a lot of work on the CMO role. Have you done anything that looks at very small startups all the way through IPO? So like C-level, Series A, B, C, D, E, IPO. And I said, I've never looked at it in that granular of a way. And I'm not aware of any academic that has. And that then began a project. We collaborated on, talked to 100 different folks who had worked at all these different stages of companies to really understand what happens, what are the needs of the organization in terms of the CMO role? What does it look like at, call it a seed, Series A level? We call that the toddler stage. And then as you go through Series B through D level, we call that the adolescent stage. And then as you get to Series E and IPO level, we call that kind of the adult stage.
Yeah.
What does the marketing organization look like? What does the firm need from marketers? And what is the skill base of the CMO in each of those stages of growth? And what we saw, I'm happy to go into more detail. And by the way, I'll make links to all this stuff available so people can look at it. What we found is that the role changes dramatically as the company evolves through these different growth stages.
So what does that mean? Like we talked earlier in one of our shows that you one of your thoughts was people look at marketers as interchangeable, but in essence, they're really a football team. And you may need a quarterback, you may need a running back, you may need a kicker, but a lot of companies were not thinking about that the right way. This to me seems right down the alley of the football analogy. And tell us a little bit about it. Like, what do companies need? Like acquisition and Series A and startup, they need acquisition specialists, and then they're going to need different things. So this has an implication for boards, CEOs, anybody hiring, and also people taking the job. Like, you don't want to put a brand person in an acquisition job right away.
Yeah. So at the three stages, so going back to kind of toddler, which is seed, Series A, what you actually look for are very scrappy generalists. You're looking for people who can think and do rapidly. who are adaptive, but who can actually roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. At that kind of adolescent stage, what you're looking for are scale experts, people who understand how they can build scale, start building the organization, et cetera. And then by the time you get to the adult stage, you're looking for more strategic leaders, people who can think about process, who can think about repeatable systems and processes that are more sophisticated. And the reason this matters is, what do you oftentimes see? An executive recruiter will look and say, guys, here's a blue chip CV or a resume
Right.
of a CMO. They came from Best Buy. Of course they can go do this small startup role.
But they can't.
But they can't, because that person at that large company had all of these resources supporting them. And when they go to a pure startup, they have to be able to actually do things that in the prior world they didn't have to do. They had other people who did that. And so it's not just that there's a challenge if you may be very successful as that scrappy generalist, but then when you move to the scale stage, you may not be as effective because that's not where your skill set is. That's one challenge. The other challenge is I go find somebody from Pepsi. Well, Pepsi can do anything.
Yeah.
But then you plop them into one of these growth stages, and then you're not clear as to why they're not succeeding. And it's because the resources around them, they just haven't proven that they can operate in that type of an environment successfully.
I proved this personally because I took one little job and did a startup for 1 year. And I learned I could do almost everything required in that, like write the web copy, but other people were better and I didn't really like doing it. So, and there's other people that were just way into it and better. So if you're a CMO and you're thinking, okay, this is my chance though, I got to take this because I've always been only in acquisition and now they're going to give me this bigger job. How do I know if I can make the leap? And how does the company hiring me know if I can make that leap?
Well, I mean, that's the great look. If I had an answer to that, all these executive recruiters would not have such turnover, right?
That's a good point. That's a good point. You'd
Their
knock
whole job,
it out. Yeah.
their whole job is to find people successfully. I do think, though, there's a deep humility that's required. That you have to look yourself in the face and in the mirror and say, this is where my skill set exists. This is where my strengths are. I don't know that I can do A, B, and C. And then the question is, well, how can you learn that?
Right.
Right. So I think, I'll give you a bad example because it hasn't really played out the way I was hoping it would. But Woodson, who is the coach of Indiana University men's basketball team, when
Yeah.
they brought him in, IU had a series of failed coaches. And
Right.
IU is a storied basketball
And one of the
program.
best basketball schools in the world. Almost as
Historically.
good as Duke.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh God. And so, but when they brought him in, he was from the NBA. He knew nothing about college basketball other than having played it. And so what did they do? They hired assistants from one from Michigan State, who was an excellent college basketball coach. They brought in a guy who had been the former coach from Ohio State as an administrative role to help coach him. My point being is that one of the things I think board CEOs and CMOs can do is to say, look, nobody is perfect for any role. My strength lies on this side. What I'd like to do is to have these other supporting resources to bolster me on this other side. So the CEO and board could do that before they get there, or the CMO in quick order can say, here's how I'd like to structure the department. And I'd like to bring somebody in who kind of bolsters my weak side, if you will.
so as you pointed out, that takes incredible humility and acknowledgement that you don't know something, which I think is a super helpful thing to keep in mind. I want to go into the potpourri and pull out another topic, which is you've been researching for a long time, actually, corporate activism. And one study just published in the Journal of Retailing titled How Good Intentions Can Jeopardize Business Success. Give us the cliff notes on this, and then we'll talk about what it means for marketers.
Well, so you're right. I've been looking at this stuff probably it really started in vain after Colin Kaepernick and Nike, because at the time, I had a lot of questions that the media was not addressing. And so I've started digging into this. We've got another project that I'm working on that hopefully will be published soon. This project was just published. It's going to be featured actually in next month's Harvard Business Review print edition. So very excited about that. This is a different look on activism, because what we said is, let's think about this from the business perspective of risk. Let's think about this from a market share risk perspective and a positional advantage risk perspective. And so, by the way, again, I'll give you a link to this. It's free to access. A lot of academic articles are not free. This one is free to access. And I think it's written actually for practitioners. It's long, academic articles are, but it's easy to understand. And the first thing is it starts reframing the conversation. A lot of times when we talk about activism, people use the word right and wrong. What's the right and wrong thing to do? Well, as CEO and CMO, the CEO's job is to protect the firm, and the CMO's job actually is to be the advocate for all consumers.
Yeah.
And so we're reframing it through this risk lens, which is what's the right and wrong thing to do for the business and brand. And so it helps explain risk. It helps explain where, depending on your activism fits on a map, it increases risk or reduces risk. The second thing is, and this is interesting, we asked a few executives to look at the model and explain how they would use it and what's the value of the model. And Joe Tripodi made this very important point. He said,
Potpourri was CMO of a number of companies, including a
Coke,
competing insurance company with me, and then Coke. Yes.
Coke, Seagram's,
Yeah.
I just a number of Subway, a number of different CMO company. You CMO'd a number of different companies, and he's a board member. But he said, Kim, the problem with activism is that executives are talking about it from a personal perspective. Like, what do I personally think is right on abortion? But he said, this model shifts the conversation to one about your duty as the CMO or your duty as a board member. And that is, what does this activism issue have to do with the brand and business? And what's the risks? And he said, it's such a tough conversation to have, activism, because everybody personalizes it. The model shifts the conversation back to the brand and business and gets people talking about and engaging on the risk. The third thing I would say about the model that's kind of interesting, Christine DeYoung, who's a partner at DHR in charge of their growth practice, she looked at the model and she said, I would tell all my CEOs to laminate this and have this on their desk. And she said, here's why. When we talk about positional advantage risk, I talk about the trade-off. If a company like Coca-Cola, who operates in over 200 countries
Right.
and localities, decides to weigh in on the Georgia voting reform bill. Now, that's time and energy of the CEO, of the board.
Yeah.
The backlash to it, their chief communications officer, that is a choice to not invest those individuals' resources and time in something else.
Yeah.
And so positional advantage risk is that you're distracted. You're moving away from the core essence of your positional advantage in the marketplace. That is a risk. So when you engage in activism that has nothing to do with the brand or business, and oh, by the way, you're just one of 100 companies that are engaging in it, there is a potential for you to diminish the strength of your core positioning.
So this is, I keep going back to the Larry Fink BlackRock note 6 years ago, I think it was 6, where, he wrote a letter that said to a bunch of companies, I think, profit's not sufficient. You have to contribute to society. And I think the question of how you contribute to society is really up for grabs. You're saying it's really, one, hard to be clear what society actually wants. Two, if it doesn't help your brand, your company position, it's not a great idea. And three, maybe things are a lot different today than they were 6 years ago in terms of how consumers are absorbing this. Is that fair?
Absolutely, the pendulum is changing. And I think the reason that, like, 4 or 5 years ago, I was saying the same things, but without mentioning names, big media organizations had no interest in it because the pressure was, you must take a stand. That's what consumers want. In reality, and I've now taught over 1,000 students and executives on this topic, there is one thing and only one thing that they all agree on. Nobody wants their companies that they purchase from to stand up for the other side. Nobody does. Liberals and conservatives agree, do not stand up
For the
on
other
the
guy?
other side's
No.
positions. And so there is a uniform position, and that is, please don't take the other side's.
Well, you know what that says to me? Don't make me mad at you.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
it's not like I guess I want you to be on my side, but before that, don't make me mad at you. And,
yeah.
because if you make me mad at you, I will stop buying you. And I think that is a real interesting piece. And that research, well, you can see companies moving towards the math. We talked about the other side, and it's college football season. So this Potpourri 3, you have studied, amongst many other things you've studied, name, image, and likeness, the NIL issue that's going on in college athletics and is dramatically changing a lot of things in college athletics. Give our listeners a primer on this. Like, what is it? And then we'll talk about how marketers should be thinking about it.
Okay. So NIL is just, it's referred to as name, image, and likeness. And what it does is it gives college athletes the opportunity to monetize their brands, right? So a college athlete, like, let me use Michael Jordan. If
Yeah.
Michael Jordan were a college athlete today at UNC,
Yeah.
he could make a whole lot of money off of
Yeah.
his name, image, and likeness, as sponsors would pay him to
Do anything. Yeah.
do anything, right? It could be, through social media, through advertising, a whole, local companies may essentially hire these kids to come and entertain some of their big clients, like a bank might do that, right? So there's all sorts of ways in which you can now get paid, including signed autographs.
Yeah.
So with this, as you can imagine, it opens up a whole new opportunity for college athletes, 18 to 23, if you will, to make money off of their name, image, and likeness, but it also can be a potential distraction away from their job as an athlete and for many schools to be a good student.
Right. Because that's one more thing you have to manage. So if I'm a marketer or I'm an athlete, how should I be thinking about this and applying it in, the real world? Let's start with the marketers, then we can go to the athletes, or we can start with either one you want. So,
Um, well, let me start with the athletes because then it'll come back, I think, to how marketers have to understand the athlete mind. So I was asked by our athletic department at UVA to work on curriculum design for our student athletes. I wrote a book with Jay Hodgkins on athlete brands, and it's a self-managed process to identify their brand, their athlete brand, and to think about how they're going to strategically activate it and then monetize it. So it's for student athletes. After I did this, I was asked to come and speak to a group of fifth year redshirt student athletes. And I had this epiphany, Mike. I'm talking to them about building their brands, and they kept, these are all fifth year great athletes from
right.
University. They're all focused on eyeballs. All they think about is, how many people can I get to follow my social media? And so I put up a bunch of images from Instagram of women, female athletes from other schools. And I said, help me understand why they're doing what they're doing. And they were hypersexualized. So without naming names, I put up this high profile female. If you looked at her images, you had no idea what sport she was in. Most of her shots were in bikinis. They were hypersexualized. imagery, etc. And I said, what's going on? And they go, oh, well, she's strengthening her brand. And I said, what? And they said she's strengthening her brand because she's getting more eyeballs. And I'll be a little blunt here. There are
No,
things
yeah,
like what Paris Hilton did that can get a whole lot of eyeballs,
yeah.
but that don't actually strengthen your brand.
Well, and I think the other thing is, and we see this a lot in the marketing side too. All eyeballs are not even close to equal. And if you had 10 CMOs following you, um, it'd be a lot better than some of the people that are going to follow those pictures. And this thinking about all eyeballs are equal is a really big risk. So, but a lot of marketers think that way too. Right?
But they don't.
I just want the read.
Well,
So
so I will say this. Here's what's interesting. So what I explained to them is I said, your brand is built not just by the size of your following, but on what you stand for. I then used the example of VW. VW around 2017 had the most buzz ever of all car brands. Do you know why? Because they had the vehicle emission scandal. I went
yeah,
back and talked about Tiger Woods, 2008. What happened to Tiger? He had unprecedented levels of buzz, even after having won all those championships, because his wife was chasing him around with a golf club and
yeah,
hitting the car. And by the way, all of his sponsors dropped him. I
yeah,
said, highest buzz ever, lost most of his sponsors. So buzz does not equal your valuable brand. And so what I did is I partnered with an undergrad named Graham 20. He and I went and spent about a year. And what we did is we looked at the top 100 most respected brands.
yeah.
And we went and we reverse engineered to find who they had sponsored. And the reason is because there's no central
Yeah, there's no
repository.
way to do it.
No,
There's no
that
database.
was it.
Yeah,
And I wanted to be agnostic of gender, of school size. I wanted to go find who were they sponsoring. And then what we did is we analyzed their posts. We analyzed their most recent 21 posts for all of these kids who were sponsored to try to figure out the patterns of the chosen folks. Interestingly, a lot of them had less than 25,000 followers, and a significant number had less than 10,000 followers. So the biggest brands actually don't need you to have 2 million. They have size. What they're looking for is the strength of the brand, the strength of your story that can help or your connection to a particular audience that can help strengthen their brands. So a number of these brands would have, for example, Paralympic.
yeah,
They'd be sponsoring Paralympic athletes, or they'd sponsor somebody who's less than 5,000 followers, but that person has a really terrific story that somehow connects to the brand. And so the aha here is that what your brand stands for is most important. That will stay with you forever. The size of your following in some cases helps folks, like a Paige Buchers,
yeah.
University of Connecticut.
Great
uh,
basketball player. So yeah,
Right. But it's for her, it's both. She was the first person Gatorade signed, and she had this amazing brand that, by the way, young girls liked, teenagers liked, moms liked, fathers liked, grandmothers liked. If you went and looked at her images, she was the Taylor Swift of athletes. No sexualized imagery, all American girl. You'd have shots of her in big baggy sweats, no
yeah.
makeup, not a bunch of bikini shots, right? And
Well,
so
yeah. And she was, dominating women's basketball all the time as well. So
until Caitlin Clark,
yeah,
yeah.
there you go. But so this says, if I'm hearing you right, which is, look, if you're an athlete here, the brands are buying you for what I'm going to call unduplicated reach or specific target markets, or in the case of Page, this is like, and I can just add this into my media plan because the the audience is so large. Am I thinking about that right? Like, if you're a marketer, you should be thinking about this as, I'm going to reach a specific market here versus I'm just stacking this up against all my other media.
I don't know that it's about reach as much as depth of brand alignment and strengthening it. So let me give you an example. I wrote a case on the
Please.
Good Feet, the Good Feet retail company. So when they were early adopters of sponsoring student athletes, they were testing it. So they're a retail store and they sell orthotics. And what's interesting is it started off, what's most important to them is brand fit, because you cannot risk the risk to the brand of associating yourself. Again, it's hard enough with a celebrity. Think of Accenture and Buick and the different sponsors who were aligned with Tiger Woods. And then you have this fall from grace that can then affect and spill over onto the core brand. Now you're asking 18 to 23-year-olds to be responsible adults. Like, thank God nobody asked me to do that.
I know very few that could handle it well.
It's a lot. It's a lot of pressure. And so that's why it's even more paramount for marketers to make sure that there's a fit in terms of the student athlete's brand. I'll give you an example. So the CEO of the largest franchising group for the Good Feet, you know what he would do? He goes
Yeah.
to practices. He talks to the parents. He wants to know who's behind the kid, right? He also starts with a university brand that is respectable. Then he looks at the coach brand. Like, because if the coach is very principled and has high standards and is of good character, then he has more confidence in the athletes that the coach has vetted. Then he goes and he looks at the athletes. All of this is about managing the brand and protecting it from undue risk.
That
And
is yes, that is I hear you saying, do your homework and you can minimize the risk. But if you're just going for numbers, it's probably not going to work. But okay, how do I measure success here in this NIL world when I'm paying to sponsor somebody? Or, I really want to hire, Kim Whitler, she's great at basketball or whatever. How do I even think about what's the right thing to pay here? And then how do I measure it and know it's working?
so the first thing is the beautiful thing here is that a lot of times you can get good athletes for a very unbelievably low price.
Yeah.
Right? So the risk is not oftentimes on the money. Okay. We're not paid Tiger Woods type. You know, you
Yeah.
could get, you could get a top basketball athlete for $50,000, $100,000 at a good ACC school.
Yeah.
Not Baycott, but a decent men's basketball. And then it's a lot.
Got plays for North Carolina, who both our teams play against a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, the risk is really typically not that much on the financial side. It's on the brand side. It's on you choose an athlete who goes and says something in a post that doesn't look good for your brand. But how do you measure it? I mean, there's different ways. So if you look at, I'll go back to the Good Feet store. They may hire people to come and to show up at a store for an autograph signing, right? So now you could actually get specific data around sales attributed to that individual who shows up, right? So if you think about, I used to work on Tide and we had NASCAR sponsorship. What would we do? We'd have the car and we'd have the driver show up at a store. And one of the ways in which we could measure it are direct sales associated with while that individual's at the store, what happens. So that's one way. The other way is you could do direct response. Some of the like Good Feet store has ads. So you could do direct response ads in some way if you have an online business and so forth. So there's different ways you could try to do it, but it's also difficult because what happens, for example, I'm a big fan of UVA men's basketball and I pay attention to the chat room. And every now and then you'll get fans who will talk about the Good Feet in the chat room because the Good Feet store sponsors UVA men's basketball and UVA women's basketball. Well, and then you'll get somebody who says, gosh, I went and I bought their orthotics. So I don't know. How do you measure that? It's attribution modeling is challenging here as it is in other areas.
So before we leave this topic, and this has to be our last topic due to time, but you've kind of talked about best practices, which is in NIL, which is vet the risk as much as you can ahead of time. Are there any other best practices you would put in here? And then any worst practices you see commonly that people should watch out for?
You're talking about marketers.
Yeah, marketers as they move in the NIL space, best practices, worst practices.
Um, I don't know that I'll use best practices, but what I would say is what I find interesting that the top brands, the most respected brands are doing is they're looking, I'm going to use the word wholesome. One of the things that I find interesting is that you can find athletes who have a lot of followers, but who are hypersexualized.
Yeah.
And the top brands, the mass brands who have grandmas and have granddaughters, and they're looking for more wholesome student athletes. And so I would really look at not just what people are saying, I'd look at the images. Um, I would, another thing that I would consider is it's obvious to go after the most popular football players.
Right.
But what's really interesting is there are these very interesting special interest stories about athletes that the top brands are sponsoring that don't have a lot of followers, but they have an unbelievably powerful story
Yeah.
of somebody who's really a really great student athlete that helps strengthen the parent company's brand. Let me use an example.
Okay.
There's a woman named Skylar Dahl. Skylar Dahl got connected with a Good Feet store early on at UVA. Now, she was on the UVA rowing team.
Yeah.
I won't go into it, but she had a medical condition as a baby, went through a ton of surgeries, and around high school said, I want to be a great athlete. Based on my physical limitations, what sports could I actually perform in? Rowing was one of them. She loves basketball, but
Yeah.
that was not going to be it. So off she goes. She goes into rowing. The Good Feet store connects with her and they love her. They love her story. Now, remember, we're talking about orthotics. Her medical condition has to do with her feet.
Yeah.
So there's a nice connection there. Well, what ends up happening to Skylar is she gets connected to the Paralympics. She just won the silver medal at one of the big global Paralympics things that was that occurred in Eastern Europe. She's this great para-Olympian now. And so one of the upsides of this is a Good Feet store connected with her when she was just, a non-starter rower because they love the story. And now look at where she is.
But they built their own brand content actually through an influencer.
Yep.
So that's a good story. We are almost at time, so we have our traditional last question, which I will give you, which is practical advice for our audience on any of these topics or any you wish that we haven't discussed yet, or funniest story you can share on the air. You can pick one or both, but you have to take at least one.
All right. So I'm gonna talk about one thing. When I do sessions on activism, the participants don't know this until afterwards because it's a key tool on how to navigate activism. And what I do is I walk them through a process, what I call steel man it out. Steel man it out. It's the opposite of straw manning. Steel manning, which means you have to argue for the best arguments for each side of the situation. So
Yeah.
let's
You
so
can't just argue yours. You have to argue both.
well, yeah, you have to steel man it out. So what I do typically, because in the data bear this out, liberals tend to have more voice at work than do conservatives. So I start with let's say it's a Disney case. I'll
Yeah.
start with give me all the best arguments why Disney should be against the parental rights and education bill. And people are very forthcoming, right? I go,
Right.
excellent. We just spent 8 minutes talking about that. I want now all the best arguments for why they should be for the bill. And what invariably happens, because conservatives don't want to speak up, what invariably happens is that there's a pause. And what I will do is I will then cold call somebody who just gave me arguments on the other side. What am I signaling? You as a leader must be able to think about all sides of an issue, not just the one that you personally hold. You must be able and executives get this. If I'm working with senior executives, generally, if I cold call them, they have the ambidexterity
Right.
to be able to articulate another point of view. Younger people struggle with this. And so I'm a big fan of when you're dealing with tough issues, especially where people are censoring themselves, a way to get around that is to Steelman it out.
I like that. I think that's a great way to end the show. And I'm going to call it planned, almost forced objectivity, which I think it's great to see that coming back to business. So thank you, Kim, for joining us. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. If you are enjoying the show, hit the like button and subscribe. Look for all of our shows on the I Hear Everything Network, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include Marketing, the battle between believers and non-believers, parts 1, 2, and 3. The rise and fall of Peloton as seen through the eyes of CLTV, that's customer lifetime value. Is AI an extinction event for agencies? And all of Kim's previous shows, including the Budweiser case, a comprehensive look at fixing at the Budweiser case, how not to manage a socio-political issue, and also a look at fixing the CMO position. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.